Okay, I can see that the audio is making some sound, so I guess we can start. Welcome to part two. I want to give a talk about teaching people how to play a game, which is in part based on my own experiences, making airships conquer the skies, and also just on my experiences as a gamer, playing games and playing tutorials. Okay, so basic question, why do you need to explain your game to people anyway? I mean, okay, yes, you do need to do that, but why is it important? And I would say it's important because if you're like me, you have like 200 games on your Steam account and you haven't played half of them. And so that means you don't have that much patience. You try playing a game and it's boring or confusing. You stop and you try something else. You have a huge backlog, or you go back to a game which you know you already enjoy. So you bounce off games pretty easily. This is not like, I don't know, 100 years ago where you would go to the older game store and you would put down like all the money in the world and you would get a box. The box came with a manual, and then you would get home and you would that was the only thing you could do anyway because there was no internet, so you would just bash your head against this and reread the manual until you understood how to play it. So the standard has definitely risen. So don't do this. This is a Penny Arcade cartoon from many years ago. You know, don't confuse your players, don't terrify your players, because then they will just leave. So, okay, I'm going to use the word tutorial to mean any sort of part of the game that teaches the player how to use the game, whether that's an actual tutorial labeled tutorial or if it's just the start of the game or whatever. It's the teaching bit. And so, a really great tutorial makes players go, oh, I didn't need a tutorial, I just understood how to play it. And actually, you might have put in a lot of effort as a developer to enable that, but the player feels like, oh, it was obvious. That's the best case. What's also good is like, okay, the player realizes that this is the bit where they figure out how to play the game, but it's fine, it's entertaining, they're having fun, whatever. And bad, but not terrible, is like, okay, this is the bit where they explain the game to me. It feels like work, but you can get through it. And of course, very bad is people leave. People feel like this is awful. I am not entertained. They refund your game, or even if they don't refund your game, they don't play it, they don't recommend it. You know, this is not a good situation for your game to be in. So I have some learnings, and one first learning I want to communicate to you is you have probably heard of flow state, I hope. So the idea there is that if you have a game, then it's cut off at the bottom. Can we fix that? Yes. You want to give people a level of challenge that is appropriate to their current level of skill. And as their skill increases, you want to increase the challenge, because they want to be in this state in between feeling overwhelmed and anxious and feeling bored. And that's where the fun bit happens. And of course, this applies to games, but it also applies to tutorials. You can have tutorials which are frustrating and anxiety-inducing because they're overwhelming or confusing, but you can also have tutorials which are so slow that the player gets bored. And I'm sorry, if the tutorial just spends like 10 minutes explaining to me how to use basic movement controls, then I lose interest and I leave. So you have to find this flow state in your tutorial as well. So now I want to give some examples of games, with different ways that games do this sort of learning thing. This is totally my subjective opinion of them. I'm going to be a bit mean to some games. These are all actually really successful games, so clearly it can't be that bad, but yeah. So maybe a classic kind of tutorial experience might be in, for example, Dishonored. It's a first-person game where you, what's called an immersive sim sometimes, but it basically means it's a first-person shooter with extra role-playing elements. And that starts out on a boat, and it teaches you how to look around with the mouse, and it teaches you how to use the WSAD keys to move around. So the really basic stuff, just in case. And then it gives you this thing at the start where this little girl comes up to you and says, hey, do you want to play hide and seek? And you can say, yes, I want to play hide and seek. And this is really obviously the stealth tutorial. And so this sort of works. It works as a tutorial. They try to integrate it into the narrative. It's not like this is the tutorial that's completely separated from the game. You're playing hide and seek with this very important character in the game, so it kind of works. But at least for me, I still felt like, yeah, this is obviously the tutorial. I did feel a bit taken out of the experience of playing the game because the intent was so obvious. So this isn't a great tutorial, but I would say this is a good tutorial because it does teach you things and it doesn't tear you out completely. Counterexample, here's Dwarf Fortress. What is going on? Who knows? I actually know because I have played this for years, and so I can absolutely tell you that there's a wagon with some dwarfs in the center, and then there's sort of a hillside sloping down, and there's some trees. But I mean, yeah, what, and this is even the updated version, which is meant to be slightly more user-friendly. It used to be even less comprehensible. And of course, now there's a graphical version, but I wanted to show you this. The Dwarf Fortress is famous for being hard to understand, for being hard to get into. And again, it's actually really successful because, everyone knows this. It's hard to get into Dwarf Fortress, So people watch videos, they read tutorials, and so on. So it can still work if the game's good enough. But it's obviously going to restrict who's going to play the game. And notably, 2006 to 2023, this was not an overnight success. This is just two people going up to 2 decades of their life into making this game and getting there eventually. So this is the game I wanted to dunk on, maybe unfairly. This is Armella. It's a strategy game set in a fantasy world with kind of animal people. It's kind of like a digital board game. It is totally successful. It is probably a really good game. I tried playing it once, and after half an hour of tutorial, I gave up because I was only halfway through the tutorial, and I was just like, I don't care anymore. I wanted to try this out. It's like a Wednesday evening. I was just gonna try out the game. So I left and never went back. So yeah, here's some movement stuff. Here's some stuff about equipable items. Here's some stuff about a focus that you can play on the hero that costs 3 magic points. This is all in the tutorial. Mm-hmm. The game tells you, or at least heavily implies, you need to know all of this before you can actually touch the real game. And so I just left. Example of a really great tutorial in a way, Baba Is You, which is a puzzle game from 2019. If you haven't played it, you should. It's just like one of the best games ever. You play like a little bunny creature, and the interesting thing about it is that the game rules are on the screen, like as these little sets of blocks, and you can push them around and you can change the way the game works. This is the very first level. And the thing is, it tells you everything you need to know. You use the arrow keys to move. This is you. Wall is stop. Okay, you can't go to the wall. Rock is push. You can push rocks. And flag is win. You win with the flag. Okay, it's a bit minimized, but you can figure it out. And that's all you need to know. It's on one screen. And this is already, the first level. This isn't the tutorial, it's just the first level. Yeah, okay, it's super duper easy. But technically, you can still fail at this, if you don't realize that you have to walk around the rock after pushing it, I guess. So this works really well, because it's just, you immediately are playing the game. You are immediately in the game, learning how to play the game and achieving game objectives. It doesn't feel like, oh, this is a trial run. You're just playing it. Okay, so how I think you should make a good tutorial. So you start out, you go through each mechanic or ability of a one by one, and you introduce it to the player, and you want to give it, you want to integrate it into the mechanics and into the story. What I mean by this is the player should be able to use this new ability to achieve some goal within the game immediately. It's not like, well, you can do this, it's actually useless, but you can do it. It should be, okay, Baba is you need to move around, you need to push rocks, so this is salient information. And if there's a story, there should also be a good in-story explanation for why you are doing this. Not just be like, this is obviously the tutorial section of the game. This doesn't have anything to do with the actual story of the game. It should be integrated into it. So this is where the example with Dishonored sort of works halfway, because yes, it's integrated into the story, but it's clearly an optional part of it which you can just skip. If you don't play hide and seek, nothing happens. Okay, maybe emotionally, but certainly not, mechanically or story-wise. And then you need to let the player actually try it out, give the player enough time to use it, figure out what it actually means, and also figure out what it means in combination with maybe other things that they've already learned. If you press these two buttons at once, something else happens, and potentially some kind of more advanced consequences of the mechanic. And once you're there, then you can give the player the next mechanic, and you just work through this step by step. And if you do it at the right pace, the player is in that flow zone where they feel like, I am learning new things, and I'm solving problems with them, and there's an emotional reason within the story why you want to do this. Which also means, if you are, for example, at the testing night and you're showing a game, some people just are very bad at reading, following instructions. There's always going to be a small proportion of people who, no matter how detailed you make your tutorial, are still going to fail. Even if you have a big blinking arrow saying, press this button, they will just not see the arrow and they will not press the button. Don't optimize your game for those people, You should aim to get the normal player through the tutorial and not the player who's bad at looking at things. Because one way to really mess up your tutorial is to make it so slow that people lose interest. Like what happened in Armello, you're in that boredom triangle. And also if people feel like they're being talked down to, they get kind of angry at the game. If it's like, if you go to a gamer and you explain to them for 10 minutes how basic movement controls work, they're gonna be kind of pissed off. So you need to ideally do this in a story context so it doesn't feel like a tutorial. Not the kind of classic thing where you're trying out your new spacesuit and it activates one ability after the other. And it feels really like a tutorial because you're not actually doing anything meaningful in the story. And also you don't need to front load everything. You don't need to explain your entire game, Armello, at the start. Just explain enough for the player to get started. Baba is you, this is the first level. And then the second level, it tells you how to pause. And also now you have these blocks, and you already know that you can move around. You already know that these little sentences mean things. But hey, this is already a puzzle. It's still an easy one. You push stop away from wall is stop, so you can move through walls. And you move flag is win together, so the flag lets you win. If you're being difficult, you can also do something complicated like wall is win. That also works actually. So it's already the game again, and you can. The game expects you to solve things using the verbs, while also teaching you things. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I make this game, Airships Conquer the Skies, and I also did some tutorials for that, and this is maybe the bit where you expect me to say, and well, obviously I applied all of this information to airships in a really clever way, and I really didn't. Partly just because I think didn't have these thoughts at that point, and also because there's some structural problems with the game that prevent that. So in airships, you build steampunk airships out of modules, and you fight with them against other players and against monsters and so on. So it needs to teach you how to build ships and how to fight with them. Unfortunately, you need to know like half a dozen mechanics to build a really basic ship. There's not just like, plop, now you have a ship. It's like, oh, connect this up to this, and but the firing arcs of the cannons, and you need crew, and blah, 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 blah. So you can't just get started like in Barbary Zero, where it's just, okay, move around. You have to do all of these things. And also, it's a strategy game. It doesn't have a story context, so I can't embed the tutorial experience within a story because there isn't a story, which also means it's hard to motivate the player. So what did I do? I just did your kind of standard tutorial, step by step, do this thing. I'm not honestly very proud of it, but it kind of works. So each tutorial step gives you a ship to finish building, teaches you some things about the mechanics of shipbuilding, and then has you use that ship to fight against an enemy, and teaches you some mechanics about how to fight them. So it kind of keeps things varied, and you get to actually use the game. And there's a lot of special logic to try and catch when players do something weird and confusing or misunderstanding, get you back on track. There's a lot of custom logic like, oh, the player has misunderstood it like this, now we need to tell them that actually you're meant to do this. So here's an example screenshot of one of the earliest tutorials. All you actually need to do is click on cannon and then click to the right of the ship a few times to put those cannons. But you can already mess this up. They're already teachable moments, because if you put the cannons so they're facing into your ship rather than out of your ship, this doesn't work very well. If you place your cannons in a way that your crew can't physically get to them, this doesn't work very well. And so it needs to catch these situations and explain to you, the crew can't get to this cannon, you need to delete it again. And so, okay, does this work? Yeah, kinda, it does work. I've seen people go through it at events a bunch of times, and each time I've had some new problems, but it largely works. But it is a bit of a slog. There's like a dozen tutorials if you want to go through the whole thing. And at the end of it, if you follow it, okay, yeah, you know how to play the game, but do you know how I was complaining about Armello? I did the exact same thing in my own game, so okay. And in practice, I think many people just watch YouTube videos and learn from that instead. So that's okay, that's a saving grace for my game. That's why it did well, I guess, is people just ignore the tutorial, that just watch YouTube. Great. So yeah, but this leads us to the question of what if your game is really systems driven? What if it doesn't have a story? What if it has all of these complicated mechanics that interact, that you can't just like ease people into? And my answer is this is bad game design. If your game has all of these interacting components and you need to understand all of them to even start, then you might feel, oh, I have designed a really clever game, but actually no, you've designed a game that's hard to learn. Because yeah, again, both airships definitely has this problem, and Armello at least thinks it has this problem because again, it wants to teach you so many things at the start of the game. And it's not the end of the world because, as I said, these games work, but it's not the best experience. So, this is in order. So yeah, Armello, for example, this is literally just copied from the 4 sub-tutorials. These are the things that the game tells you at the start you need to know before it actually lets you into the game proper. And each of those is like 20 minutes long in my experience. An airship, similarly, you need to know this whole list of things just to build a simple airship. This is not good. If I decide the game now, I would not do this. So yeah, you want to design your game to be learnable. And this means there needs to be a subset of your mechanics that is already fun, that is already a game in a way, that is easy and fast enough to learn that people can just learn it and start playing. So in Baba Zero is a pretty extreme example, because all you actually need to do is move around and push things. And that's, if you just have that soccer band puzzles, that's a whole genre of puzzles. So if you stop adding mechanics after the first level, you just have a soccer band game. So that's already okay. Or similarly, if you have like some kind of side scroll and you have, okay, move left, move right, jump, that's okay. You know, people will get that. But if it's a whole list of things, that's more of a problem. And of course, you need to design that into your game. You need to actually make it possible to play a game simply. It doesn't mean make simple games, it just means make it possible to scale up bit by bit. So going back to airships, I wanted to tell you about the other tutorial that the game has, which I think is rather more successful. So last August, I introduced a big updated game, which introduced a whole bunch of new mechanics to the kind of map conquest mode. And I wanted to create a new tutorial for it because the existing conquest mode tutorial was incredibly bad, to the point where it gave you actively bad advice that would make you lose the game. It would tell you like, go and attack these guys, and it would just send you into impossible fights. So I wanted to do that a bit better. But I didn't want to do this big on Rails tutorial like I did before, where you have like a special map and it tells you step by step, and you know, people would just hate it and they would bounce off the game. So instead I built an advice system. It's kind of like Clippy, but less bad, I think. So the system looks for specific situations where it has some piece of advice, like, hey, you could do a trade treaty with these guys, or hey, you could build a market in this town. And then it gives you a very simple pop-up that just says that, hey, you could build a market here. And then if you want to, you can say, hey, please give me the step-by-step instructions. But that's opt-in, so it doesn't overload you. Or you can also immediately see the manual page about the relevant thing. So that looks like this. At the start, you have this thing, and it just tells you, well, you might want to pick a technology to research, and you might want to send a spy to another city, because these are 3 things you can do at the start of the game. They always have show me how and tell me more, or just go away. And yeah, show me how then puts you into a really step-by-step thing, which points with arrows to each individual button you have to press. So that's really safe, and it really gives you all the information. Or here's a more complicated example. It will notice that this other player would be willing to start a non-aggression pact, and so it will actually tell you how to do that. Or here's the manual. And the thing is, this can really segue from being a tutorial to being more of an advice system, where it genuinely goes, hey, here's an opportunity, you know, you could do this, you could do that. And so even quite late in the game, these might still sometimes pop up to inform you of some interesting situation, like, hey, there's this interesting diplomatic angle you could try. And that's pretty nice, because it satisfies you just smoothly move from being told the game into playing the game thing, and it's not overwhelming or boring. It's not an absolutely complete solution, but that's okay. I wasn't aiming for that. There's some details which you need to do right, especially if you have some logic for when one of these bits of advice trigger, you have to gracefully handle when they stop applying. Like, you know, this empire was willing to do a non-aggression pact with you, but now they changed their mind, and you somehow need to, you know, stop showing that bit of advice or whatever. But that's doable. So if you have a very mechanics-driven game, I can recommend that kind of approach. It can actually work really well. It doesn't have to be like Clippy. Okay, so in conclusion, there's basically 3 points which I wanted to make here. One is that when you teach a game, you need to keep people in the flow state. So you don't want to bore them, you don't want to over-explain, you also don't want to frustrate them, you do need to explain it. The second thing is it should be part of the gameplay. You should really ideally integrate the learning experience into the gameplay and into the story, so there isn't a tutorial. You just start playing and you learn how to do things step by step because they make sense in the story and they make sense mechanically, and you are solving problems in the story. And then, in order to do that, you need to actually design your game that you can do this step by step thing. So you should think about this right from the start in your game design. Not make a giant ball of wool that no one can learn. And that's all. Thank you so much for listening. We are gonna, I think, take questions. I guess we can record the questions. Do you think that will work? Okay, we will try to record the questions. So if you have specific questions about the talk, you can ask. Yes?
Do you know actually any strategic game that have good tutorials? Because usually
no. I mean, the short answer is no, because they are always interconnected balls of wool.
It's not easy, but...
It's not easy. I think Civilization 6 did this thing where it at least tried, where it actually gives you multiple levels of tutorial to try and aim for anyone between. I don't know what the computer is to look. I've already played all versions of Civilization. Just tell me what's new. So that kind of works, but basically no.
Yeah, I can see that.
Old school Warcraft 2, there the tutorial is going through the progress of the storyline. You start off building just a base and 2 farms, and you've completed your mission. Then the next one is we're going to go scout here. We need archers, blah, blah, blah. And so you slowly are introduced to new units there.
That's true, yes. Warcraft 2 does actually do a really good job. Not the very basics, okay, it doesn't teach you those. You're just expected to know what the mouse is and how to press buttons and so on, which is probably actually okay. But then, I think it does a really good job. The very first level feels a little tutorial-y, but it's okay. And then it kind of starts pushing back. I think that's a great example.
The version 1.0 tutorial of Stellaris, so the original release tutorial for a Paradox game, they really did a nice job in like creating an advisor that's kind of funny and voiced and so on. That really helps there. But it's the same like Civilization, because it is set up to have a good tutorial, because the progression is also a complexity progression. At the beginning of a 4X game, you just need to know about movement and maybe found a city or so on before you even start thinking about wars or unit movements and so on. So it's kind of built in the game design as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can do that design-wise, that obviously you unlock things. Like before you build a city in Civilization, most of the mechanics don't matter because you can't produce anything. So you can design it like that. Yeah.
Curious for your airships, did you consider just giving them a prefabricated ship so they could just go straight into battling first before figuring out how to build one themselves?
That's the first tutorial. Oh, yeah. The first tutorial is just to get a tiny ship. Now we're going to fight this completely trivial enemy you basically can't lose against. Which some people complain that that's too simple, but I feel like just let people see the user interface and not, freak out. Okay. Yes?
Speaking of Warcraft, not the strategy games, but the World of version. You've seen the retail, how they do it. If you start as a new character, you're going to be getting all these pop-ups coming out of everything saying you can do this over here, you can do that over there, and it's connected always to the buttons where you can get to. See, would you consider that a successful tutorial? Because obviously it's an online game and it's an MMORPG, so it's not going to give you an entire tutorial level. But would that be considered a successful tutorial system or a rather boring one? Or tedious?
I would actually worry that, I haven't played World of Warcraft, so I don't know. I would worry that would, if anything, be overwhelming. Definitely, if you get a tutorial that gives you a lot of information, you might be bored or you might be overwhelmed. And I think if I was developing Warcraft, I would find it extremely difficult to even figure out what a good tutorial should look like. because it's a game with a slowly declining user base, there's just not that many people starting to play World of Warcraft. And so it's very hard to find a novice to even try this with. Because, yeah, of course, you always have to figure out who you are aiming this tutorial towards. I think with World of Warcraft, it's kind of hard to find anyone who would start playing it. Again, World of Warcraft, super successful game, but tutorials also have a tendency to get worse over time as new mechanics get patched into the game and the tutorial gets amended somehow to mention those, and what started out as a nice clean experience turns into a mess. So, but I haven't played it personally. Okay, I think that's it. So yeah, thank you again for listening. The plan now is to just chat. We can talk a bit more about tutorials in general, or just chat to each other. Thank you.